Adventure to a disabled person can be the chance to sail a boat by themselves, to go off a rock face, to take to the air, having that opportunity to take risks which they are otherwise denied in their everyday lives. I'm John Crosby. I'm the Centre Director of the Calvert Trust in Keswick. We're an outdoor centre which specialises in providing adventurous outdoor activities for people with disabilities. For a number of years I've noticed the need for a film showing the issues and solutions to moving people in adventurous outdoor environments without access to mechanical aids. Adventure to a disabled person can mean the wind in their hair or the water rushing past the boat and saying, life's worth living.
I think I have to have never go but like this really stopped me doing a lot of active things.
As an employer or someone working in this field, we have a duty of care to both the person lifting and the person who is being lifted. It's obviously essential that neither of those parties get hurt by inappropriate lifting. Over the last number of years, there's been changes in regulations which has affected people's ability to train folks to lift people in the outdoors.
3, 2, 1, lift.
These are really good bits of legislation. However, in the outdoor environment, it is not the same as a hospital or school environment where it is reasonably practical to implement them. We're not here to contradict anything in the legislation. We're just here to show you ways that they can be adhered to in an outdoor environment.
3, 2, 1, lift.
Regulations state that you should avoid lifting as far as is reasonably practical. There are a number of situations in the outdoor environment where it is not reasonably practical to provide mechanical aids to lifting. The purpose of this film is to show you how to move and handle people safely in the outdoors whilst at the same time minimising the risk of injury to yourselves. We're going to show you the potential moves you may need in the outdoors. Chair to ground and back again. Chair to chair, chair to boat. Recovering people who've fallen out of their chairs back into their chairs. Getting somebody out of the water, putting people in the equipment they need to undertake the activities. This does sound a long list at the moment, but we'll go through it slowly and actually illustrate all of these points with examples during the film. We're going to break this film down into 3 main sections: self-moves, moves using aids, and manual handling. This follows the main principles of manual handling, which are avoid, assess, and reduce. So first off, let's look at how an individual can move themselves as far as possible, or how we can contribute by providing that assistance which is required, such as holding the back of the chair, to enable that person to be as independent as possible.
Nobody's ever hurt themselves lifting me, only because I don't let people lift me.
As Janice has just implied, the best possible move is one where you don't get involved at all. Everyone forgets that the individual can normally contribute to a certain degree and quite often can do the move unaided.
Personally, I'm stubbornly independent and I really don't like being helped at all. Generally in life I'll wheelie down slopes because you stay in your chair that way. Then approach the boat. I don't have any brakes on my wheelchair, so just sort of let the chair rest against the side of the canoe and then transfer down, reposition my legs and then drop down into the kayak. I think more often than not, maybe if it's on a wet slope or something, then I'd rather they held the chair than touch me at all. That would be more useful for me personally. I really try not to be lifted or manhandled at all.
If there's a way of transferring me by either involving my chair or me getting onto the floor first, then that's the option first that I will go for before anyone physically starts to lift me.
I've seen different people do different floor to chair transfers, and there's a huge scope of variety there. That some people have a style that works well for them and that would be impossible for somebody else to even try.
Most chair users will have fallen out of their chair at some time. You know, it may be a little bit of a shock to them under the circumstances, but they will also know the best way to get back into their wheelchair and can help guide you to what help that they require.
If I do fall over, it's better that people don't try and stop me or grab me. Let me fall over and I have to fall. And then when I'm stable, I can decide how to get back up and tell people I need to help me back up.
As Trish has said, not everyone can do a floor to chair transfer, but you may be able to help somebody by using a box or other intermediate platform so they don't have to do the full lift in one go. There's a number of things to think about if you're working with wheelchairs. Firstly, if you grip any part of a wheelchair, it will normally fall off. Arms come off, foot plates come off. So make sure if you are assisting that you are actually holding on to a firm part of the chair. Push bars are ideal, they're designed to be held and moved. That's a good place to help stabilise a chair with.
Great. And then if you just stay behind me while I put my brakes on.
Okay, got that?
One of the frequent problems has been when people have tried to lift up the chair by the wheels, and that might be with me in it or me out of it, but usually the wheels turn round and they manage to take someone's shin and give them a good couple of bruises, and so it's very important to be able to actually lift the frame of the chair rather than the wheels. They turn round, that's the whole deal.
If you are actually going to move using a chair, try and get the casters facing opposite the direction they'd normally travel in, because this widens the base and makes the whole chair more stable.
So in the outdoors, it's always a changing environment, and it's really important to use as much common sense as you've got, bucket loads of it, and to communicate.
It's also very important that everyone communicates throughout, and that if anyone has any questions or doubts, that they sort of air them there and then to make sure everyone knows what we're doing.
The classic mistake is to try and help somebody to move who can actually move perfectly independently themselves.
And so it's really important to be able to gauge that and to talk through exactly what they feel comfortable in doing and how it's going to work. And then if you need assistance, then especially if you've been a chair user for a while or you've lived with your condition for a while, then being able to say what works best for you is always going to be the next best option.
The most important thing is, can you avoid a move completely? If you can't avoid it completely, reduce it to the minimum possible.
Just kind of back to where the door goes. Can we tilt James that way a little bit more? Yeah, okay, that's about right.
After seeing someone who is very independent move, we're now going to show you ways in which we can assist someone with less mobility to move using low-tech mechanical aids such as slide boards and slide sheets, transit seats, benches and harnesses.
Today we're going to try using a variety of different techniques on how to board different boats and yachts and things. The first technique we're going to use is the bosun chair. Now this is where two people can help you and you get into a sling and you're lifted up and then over into the boat. This is a good technique, especially if you're very limited in your mobility, or also if the boat is too high for you to physically manage any other transfer into it.
Fantastic. When moving somebody, you've always got to consider the dignity of that person. And sometimes it becomes quite an issue, particularly when you're working with mechanical hoists. The individual may not wish to be the bag of potatoes loaded onto a boat. There's just going to be a snap above your head.
I felt I had very little control over it. I was actually just sat there and everyone else was pulling me. And I think, especially for a woman, you can feel quite self-conscious on that.
The individual may prefer to actually undertake the lift themselves or be lifted manually by carers.
But then you've got to think at the end of the day, you know, if this is something that you want to get onto, you've just got to have to accept it and accept the help around you to board it.
Comfy?
Yeah. The end goal is to actually get on and do the activity. Nobody wants to be either damage themselves or to cause damage, and so it's important to look at how you're being moved and the people that are around you, what you're asking them to do, and whether that's reasonable.
I'm trying different ones out to see which one suits me, but obviously it'll depend on levels of people's mobility. I also tried using the planks where I literally pushed up with the help of someone behind me and then pushed straight in. That was a very smooth technique and I was very impressed with that. No effort at all of that. I didn't have to leave my chair. That's nice. I just had to get my chair onto the boat and then transfer out. The second thing that we're going to try out is sliding across a sliding board. Now you can use various things to, as long as the board is reasonably slippy, that's all you need is a piece of board.
So Janice, if you were less able or the gap was bigger, we could use a slide board to bridge the gap, or as a matter of improvisation, an old rudder blade would do the job as well.
Yeah.
Got a nice smooth surface and good and strong.
Yeah, and it's actually thinner on this side, isn't it?
It is.
So that would be actually good for going under there.
Yeah? Are you happy to use this one?
Yeah, try that one.
Put that one there. My only concern, obviously, is that's a bit rounded and a bit wobbly, so I'm going to keep a hand firmly on that.
Okay. More effort on my side. I literally only had someone just to hold my chair. That way I could slide across, doing it myself. I quite like that technique.
Okay, Janice, I'm going to just try and improvise a couple of other alternative methods of getting on board. This is a dagger board off this boat. You're just going to use as a really large slide board.
That technique means that you're going to have to get down onto the floor and then onto the board and then slide across. You can do this virtually on your own. You may need someone to stand behind you just to hold your chair steady as you're transferring down to the floor.
As an improvised slide sheet, I'm going to use this sail bag here.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so what we'll do, if you're happy to do this as a demo, is if you do a quick transfer on here, I'll put this underneath you and then pull you on board.
If you're on a sliding board, you can just gently slide and you've got no problem of catching. Whereas if I went into one of the canoes here or the kayaks, going on this floor here, I've got problems of especially catching my skin and then suffering then for weeks later with that problem. I would either use a sliding board or a sliding sheet. And even if you just had the sliding sheet and no one lifted you, but just having it under you to protect you, to guide you along as you're sliding along, the more support in that way, the better.
Here you can see a sleeping mat being used to prevent pressure sores by protecting the skin from uneven surfaces on the ground. This type of mat is readily available, either an old sleeping mat or the foam out of an old buoyancy aid. One and we'll lift and twist. This can also be used for helping to move somebody, as you can pull the mat which takes the person with them. Right. Okay, James?
Yes.
Right.
One of the issues, certainly for me, is I've got to be really aware of pressure relief and of my skin when I'm moving, when I'm not able to feel what surface I'm going over, then I've got to make sure that I'm not going to catch on anything and cause myself any damage.
You may have that week of an outdoor activity, but you could spend 6 months in bed recovering from it by marking your skin. Therefore, priority number one to yourself is watch your skin at all times. Never just rush into a transfer. Think beforehand, think, right, I've got to get from here to there in the safest way, and then you talk through an able-bodied person who may be helping you and say, right, this is how I want to do it.
There is an important legal case where a lady with disabilities was being denied access to leisure activities and was also having her dignity affected by the no manual lifting policy of a local council. The judge ruled that the council had to enable manual handling to take place, at the same time minimising the risk to the care workers. When considering any lift, it's really important that you minimise that chance of damaging yourself. And this can be best done by thinking through 4 main points. Remember tile, the task, the individual, the load and the environment.
I'm going to stay in this direction and go down,
Yes,
and then
please.
turn. All right.
Okay. The task is elements such as where does the move start, where does it end,
Hang on, there's a bee in the chair.
how far is it going to go, how much height have we got to gain and lose. Does everybody understand what we're trying to achieve? Okay, should we go and have a look?
Yeah, if you just sort of hold the back of the chair just as I go down, just so it doesn't run off. Please.
Which of these elements can actually be reduced? Can you bring the start and finish points closer together? Can you make the start point higher so there's less strain on your back when you start the lift? Can you do it in stages? Lovely. So again, the actual size of the lift and the forces put upon individuals are reduced. Yep. With respect to the individual, you want to make sure that the people can physically carry out the lift which you're asking them to do, whether they're physically strong enough, whether they're the right size and balanced as a team with the right people in the right place doing the right part of the lift, whether they've got any injuries or other medical conditions which may prevent them from doing the lift. The obvious one is that they already have an existing back injury or shoulder injury which might prevent or be aggravated by doing the lift. In addition, you must make sure that people are warmed up and prepared for the lift, otherwise you're more likely to cause an injury. If the team or the individual is not strong enough to do that lift, you obviously must avoid doing it or find an alternative. L is the load, which is one of the things is more difficult to change because the person is the person. However, you still can make the load easier to handle by providing equipment that you get a better grip on the person than you could otherwise have, and making sure they know how they can help you by taking as much as they can themselves, or by making your lift easier by being in the right position, using the right techniques. The other element is certain bits of the body can be moved before the main lift, which can make the load lighter as well. Finally, the environment is essential that is as safe as possible. You need to remove obstacles in the way of the lift, make sure the ground isn't slippy, make sure any mobile elements like boats are stable as possible. You're working on uneven ground, maybe half in the water, on a slippery jetty. You've got to make sure that your footwear is appropriate to the environment you're working in, that you've made the ground as stable as you can, and you particularly place your feet well before you start the lift. For example, the jetty by the Strider catamaran is lethal in terms of seaweed, goose poo, wooden surfaces which aren't treated. You've got to be careful where you place your feet.
I'm conscious of the fact that when I'm being transferred from, say, my wheelchair to a buggy, that the people transferring me should not put themselves at risk of injury, and the main risk being, the lower back, I would say.
Without a doubt, back pain is a major issue for us today. If we look back at 2004 and have a look at the injuries that occurred within the health service, 52% of all injuries that resulted in more than 3 days absence involved moving and handling. The bottom line is that in terms of what you do, it's going to involve handling people.
Oh, no.
That's what I mean.
The optimal position for managing any load is for that load to be as close to you as possible, so we can essentially get vertical loading of the spine. If you want to minimise the damage to your spine, try to avoid handling loads at a distance. Try to avoid postures that get rid of your natural spinal curves and take you into these type of flexed positions. And also try and avoid manoeuvres that are going to need you to twist, because these are more likely to cause you problems. If we're saying that you're going to avoid postures that involve bending your back, the only way you're going to do that is by utilising your leg muscles. Now, these are the strong muscles on the front of your thighs and also in your backside. They're designed to propel your body forwards, up and down. They're used to carrying significant load, and they are far better equipped to allow you to manoeuvre heavier loads than by trying to utilise the muscles in your back. A couple of bits of equipment that will make your life significantly easier are something called a patient handling sling. It gives you something to get hold of. And I would argue that if having looked at all other possibilities, the only way for that person to access that particular environment is going to be via a lift, this is going to reduce your chances of injury, as is maximising the number of people who are going to be involved in undertaking that manoeuvre.
Avoid lifting wherever possible. However, if you have to lift, follow Julian's advice, and that will minimise the risk of injury for yourself. Julian has explained the advantages of the handling sling, in that it makes the person easier to hold, you can get more lifters involved, and in addition, it needs less training than any of the other moves we're going to show you. The handling sling we use is the Transit. This is because it's cheap, it's easy to fit, easy to use, and comfortable for the person being moved. If you don't have access to a handling sling, you'll have to revert to the classical methods of lifting, the top and tail and the Australian lift.
I'm a C5 level, so I broke my neck and my hands don't work, and I've got biceps and shoulders but no triceps, so I need help with transferring.
Okay, we're going to top and tail? Yes. Our final group of moves are going to show ways in which someone with even severe mobility impairments may be involved in the outdoors. Although these are now deemed controversial, we still find them the best method of lifting a person as a last resort.
Top and tail and the Australian lift that I think are other options are when people actually are physically helping you to move. For somebody who's got a higher level of brake, that's not able to contribute and is verbally managing how that process happens.
Both work equally as effectively. It's very important though that both of them happen decisively and the timing is called prior to them happening. Particularly for the top and tail, I'm able to participate and help by of bringing my elbows in just before the lift happens, so I'm kind of using my shoulder muscles to make sure that we have a good grip whilst the lift is happening.
If you don't have any aids, such as a transit or a slide board, the simplest lift to use is a top and tail or two-man lift. This is achieved by putting the arms of the lifter under the armpits of the person being lifted and making sure you grip their wrists with them holding their own hands and bracing downwards to stabilise their shoulders. The person on the feet needs to use an appropriate hold where they can comfortably lift the individual's legs using clothing, sliding one arm underneath or both hands underneath, whichever is appropriate for the lift you're about to do. Somebody with a high mobility impairment and weak upper body or arm strength may find when you try and lift them using their lower arms, their elbows flap out to the side. You may need to counter this by putting one hand on the outside of the elbow, just pushing it in to make sure that you've stabilised the arm for them.
Okay then, on lift. 3,
This will normally require 2 men on the top half of the lift, so they've got a spare hand for the elbow. This brings us nicely on to the 3-person lift, because if you're using 2 people at the top, you then need your 3rd person on the tail, on the legs, and again, you work as a team, which helps share the load of the top of the body, as well as being able to control the elbows. The more people you use does share out the load between you, but obviously it isn't spread out evenly, and the people on the top will take a higher loading. Use the individuals involved in the lift appropriately so that the heavier weight is taken by the stronger people. If you have a 4th person available, you can spread the load even further, usually with a top and tail by putting the extra person on the feet again, but possibly further up the legs so they are carrying more of the weight. As always, you must try and avoid the lift wherever possible, assess the risk. And if you can't avoid it, you've got to reduce it. The Australian or shoulder lift isn't often used, but can be valuable if you look at the safety points in raising people a vertical distance for their move. This is conducted by putting your shoulder underneath the armpits of the person being lifted. It's important that the person being lifted has good upper body strength so they can actually help by taking their weight on the shoulders of the people who are lifting. And they put their arms over your back. You need to join your outside hand round the back of the person being lifted. This prevents the person being lifted from toppling over backwards. Using your inside hands, go underneath the thighs or knees and interlock your hands together with your partner underneath the legs. The best grip to use is a wrist-to-wrist grip, so each person is holding the other person's wrist, because this is secure. Even if one person slips, the other person should still be able to hold on and keep the bond intact. But most of the weight is taken on the shoulder, again using correct back posture and your legs to actually make the power to raise the person in the lift. In a lot of environments where the Australian lift is used, you end up going outside your stable base. It's really useful to have a 3rd person standing in the direction of which you're trying to travel to guide the person being lifted and to control how far they move and to stabilise yourselves as you complete the lift. If you're involved with water activities, it's best to use a low access boat. This avoids the issues of having to lift somebody over the high sides of a standard safety boat. Once you've got the low access, it's just as easy as getting somebody out of a swimming pool. Make sure your footing provides a good stable base and that you use your legs as much as possible. And if you start with your arms crossed, it means that when you lift them, they'll end up either sitting or lying on their back in the safety boat rather than face down. We've looked at techniques and ways of reducing the load, but it's also important to look at the number of times you have to repeat the move. the repetition. A lift which may not hurt somebody if done once a day could certainly hurt them if they're doing it frequently. This must be considered as part of the risk assessment. Part of the ways you can reduce the lift is by sharing the load between more people and reduce the number of times you've got to repeat that lift by rotating your staff. Consequently, you can not only assess a single lift, but your working day, week and year. It's absolutely essential that there's a clear understanding between the employer and the employee about what are safe working practices. To help create a safe environment, it's important that you look at the basic requirements of the Health and Safety at Work Act. The purpose of the Health and Safety at Work Act is to protect both employees and members of the public. The duty of the employer is to make an assessment of any risks and to provide safe working practices and the appropriate equipment. Finally, they must provide appropriate training for their employees. Organisations may find they want to record what works best in their environment to move people in and out of specific situations. A personal handling profile may be a useful tool identifying what works best for them if you're going to have to manually handle. Please be aware that legislation does change. It's important that you stay current and keep in touch with HSE guidelines. Equally, as an employee, you must follow the health and safety policies. You must practice the safe working habits and you must use any protective equipment provided. This is the best way to protect both yourself and your employer. As an employee, it's important that you don't do something that you're not trained for, or you don't understand, or you consider maybe unsafe. If in doubt, speak to your employer. In the outdoors, you will have to improvise the moving of people, and ultimately you may have to lift somebody. There is no law which says you cannot lift. What you must do is avoid, assess and reduce the lifting to protect both yourself and the person you're moving. For over 30 years, the Calvert Trust has been providing people with disabilities the opportunity to participate in the outdoors, and it's been a great opportunity to give something back to the field. Some people just enjoy being here. Others develop skills which they can transfer to daily life to overcome challenges there. And some folks actually really take to the activities and continue with those as recreation for life.
I'm into training landers, hang gliders, muscles, off-roading, comebacking, anything that gets me in the outdoor environment.
"30 years ago, very little opportunities existed for people with disabilities in the outdoors. With more people involved, who knows what may be possible in the future.